Well, good morning. Welcome to Masterclass Theology. I am Big Rev.
And I'm Pancho.
We have the honor today of being in First Kings chapter 4. And we want to say a special welcome to you listening on the podcast. Thank you for following us on this journey, this special new series we are in the book of First Kings. And also want to say hi to all of you who are watching this on YouTube. So glad you're with us today. Feel free to like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. But let's open with a word of prayer, and then I will share the text on the screen, and we'll get going with this. God, we're so grateful for your word, and we're thankful, God, for for characters to study like Solomon. And we are just looking forward to what your word has for us today. I'm grateful for my friend Pancho and for just the fresh eyes he has at this text. And we pray, oh Lord, that you would be blessed today and during this time, and that we'd be challenged and encouraged. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So let me share the text so we can do that. All right. So we are in First Kings chapter 4, and we're going to start here with a bunch of names. And so Solomon was a real person he was a real king with a real kingdom. And yeah, so we would expect Solomon to have in his kingdom a bunch of officials. I mean, my goodness, we have our governments and our politicians, and all those politicians have interns and they have secretaries and all these things. So yeah, so here we go. First Kings 4. King Solomon was king over all Israel, and these were his high officials. And you're going to forgive me, I'll do my best with these names, but it is a nice list of names. Azariah, the son of Zadok, was the priest. Elihoreph and Ahijah, the sons of Shisha, were secretaries. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was in command of the army. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Azariah, the son of Nathan, was over the officers. Zabud, the son of Nathan, was priest and king's friend. Ahishar was in charge of the palace, and Adoniram, the son of Abda, was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel who provided food for the king and his household. Each man had to make provisions for 1 month in the year. These were their names: Ben-Hur in the hill country of Ephraim, Ben-Deker in Makaz, Sha'al-Bim, Beth-Shemesh, and Elam Beth-Hanan, Ben-Chesed in Arubot. To him belonged Soko and all the land of Hefer. Ben Abinadab and all of Naphath Dor. He had Taphath, the daughter of Solomon, as his wife. Ba'anah, the son of Ahilud, in Ta'anak, Megiddo, and all Beth Shean, that is beside Zerathan below Jezreel, and from Beth Shean to Abel Meholah, as far as the other side of Jokmeam. Ben Geber in Ramoth Gilead, he had villages of Jair the son of Manasseh, which are in Gilead, and he had the region of Argob, which is in Bashan, 60 great cities with walls and bronze bars. Ahinadab, the son of Edo in Mahanaim, Ahimaaz in Naphtali, he had taken Basemat, the daughter of Solomon, as his wife. Ba'anah, the son of Hushai in Asher and Bealot. Jehoshaphat, the son of Parua in Issachar. Shimei, the son of Elah in Benjamin. Geber, the son of Uri in the land of Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and of Og, king of Bashan. And there was one governor who was over the land. Oh, my goodness, that's a lot of names, a lot of titles, all those things. Pancho, what do we think about this opening list from 1 to verse 19?
Well, the first thing is I don't envy you having to read all those names out loud. So the things that kind of stuck out to me are more in the beginning, and I did notice that he kept Nathan's son as a priest and trusted advisor, who obviously Nathan was a big a role in his father's life. So that's kind of cool to see his name still made the cut. And the other thing I have, right, it's kind of a question for you. It's so the first verse, yes, full verse, no, maybe verse 2. Azariah, son of Zadok, was the priest. And then further down in verse 4, we have Zadok and Abiathar were priests. So I figure you know a little bit more about like the priesthood back in ancient Israel, but so like, was that mean basically Zadok's son was like the main priest, and the other guys are just kind of other priests that serve too, or why the distinction, or why two different slots?
Yeah, I don't honestly know, because I don't think it says either one of them was the high priest.
Okay, that'd be a title.
We kind of get the idea that the priesthood was kind of in chaos after Saul. I mean, Saul killed all the priests, and when they sided with David, and David had a couple priests with him, and then that priestly family, like eventually, like Eli, the part of the holdover from the Samuel story was that Eli and his priestly line were eventually going to be done, and they were no longer going to be God's chosen priests anymore. And so at some point, the Eli priesthood was going to end, and there was going to be another priesthood. The problem with David and his transition to Solomon, as we learned either last week or 2 weeks ago, is that there was this political divide, and David said, "You know what? We're not going to go that way with that family anymore. We're going to go with this one over here." And so we're kind of expecting the priesthood to be, I don't think rebuilding is the right word, but it's kind of in a different state with Solomon coming on board, and so he's in charge of the priests. And so what we do know is that any priesthood from what we get from the Old Testament is that the Old Testament priesthood was transferred from a father to a son. So the priests are all in some variation sons of Aaron, and so that is so we're seeing which we would expect fathers and sons. And so yeah, he does have it listed twice here. So maybe things are in a flux. Maybe he has extras. I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of a transition, but great question, Pancho.
All right, cool, cool. And so we talked about, and the only other thing, a lot of bends, a lot of bends, and I kind of like his setup. And this is after he got his wisdom from God, you know, in the last chapter. But I like how, you know, as king, and maybe this is the way I'm thinking about things, but he could have ordered the system a little different where he's got 12 governors, each was responsible for 1 month for the king's household and supplying that. And it seems like very fair and well organized of a system where it could have been different. You know, he could have just chosen the richest and like, hey, you're in charge for now until you're bled dry and keep moving on or something. But it seems like he had a good system there for having the people supplying the crown.
Yeah, I agree. And it looks like also he's got some people who are going to be loyal to him. We know they're going to be loyal because they're marrying his daughters.
Mm.
And so they at least 2 or 3 times it was listed that one of his officials had a daughter as his wife. So First Kings here seems to, in terms of like the timeline, it's jumping ahead right here and is showing his established, because we're wondering how old Solomon could have been. I mean, I know in the last session he was asking for wisdom, and he said he was but like a little child with God. Well, obviously he wasn't like a little child. We kind of pictured him maybe being in his early 20s or something. I don't know, but here he's got daughters that are grown and married, and so this might be fast forwarding a bit, looking at his kingdom and his established kind of bureaucracy. And so we're just, we got to take a step back and just kind of see, okay, what is the author of First Kings doing here? But he's presenting Solomon and his, I guess, kingly court or bureaucracy or something. So it's, if you are very literally looking at this is now chapter 4. That means he can only be this old, and we got to be careful. And the author of First Kings may be communicating something different here, but by just showing his entire kingdom and getting that out of the way at the beginning versus towards the end. So that's that jumped out at me is, man, how old could his daughters have been if he was a younger guy? I mean, I only bring that up because it talks about being married to these daughters, and so
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a
I
great
mean, it's like,
point.
well, why would you mention that? Well, why would the text mention that unless they were married? And so I'm just saying that's just it's
It's kind of like a genealogy chapter in the beginning, just kind of
right.
listing out some things you need to know. like some of the other books have had. Okay, yeah,
Right. And I like what you said there, Pancho. This does present Solomon as very well organized. You know, you could attend one of those parties and you can tell the party planners just really did a great job. They really had everything. They crossed every T and dotted every I. Solomon looks like the kind of guy that's going to do that. Like he seems to have everything figured out, or he has a very wise team in place that knows how to direct traffic, kind of thing. So it's I love how you put that. He asks for wisdom, and he seems to have wisdom in his crew, in his team. And so,
yeah. I like what you just said too. That it might there's wisdom in having the right people around too. Maybe you're not the best in something, but have someone that'll shore up your defenses in certain areas. Because I don't really think about that, but that's a really good point. Like you have the right people in the right place in your life. That's still being wise. It might not be leaning on your own wisdom, but having the wisdom enough to know that someone out there smarter is very good to have.
right, and to take it, that's a really great point you just made, Pancho. But to take it one step further, the text kind of let us know earlier that maybe there was nobody else that was smarter or wiser or more impressive. Maybe Solomon was the most impressive person in his world, and everything he did was just really good, and everything. I mean, we don't know, but what it does teach us is that even if that is you, it is still wise to have an organized team. It's wise to have your brothers by you and have your team in place, even if you're the most talented person. We don't know, but the text was very favorable to Solomon. Like, no one's going to be like this guy. He's going to be a cut above everybody else in most ways. So it's that goes to your point, Pancho, is that even if that was him, the most impressive man in his entire world, he could have rested on his laurels and said, I got this. Instead, he wisely put teams in place, and that says a lot.
And that's a dangerous spot to be in too, right? I got
Right?
this.
He definitely, at least from what we can see here, did not have this. He put a team in place, and we would hope within that team there would be some kind of accountability. I know in our world, in our network, we want to have, as guys, we want to have, brothers in place to be able to keep us accountable and to be able to challenge us if needed. And we always we watch we can always watch the athletes on TV, and we see how, and the celebrities out there, and they just get into all kinds of trouble, and we wonder, is there nobody in their world that has the ability to tell them no? Do they have
Yeah,
anybody that doesn't sing their praise all the time? Do they have anybody that's willing to call them on their stuff? And we almost wonder no, and we marvel at the problems they get into. But here we have at least a team in place, and each one seems to have their own lane, and then they can all rock that lane, and they don't have to step outside of their lane. They can just stay where they're at, and there's something to be said about that. That's good leadership. And for right now, Solomon's showing some good leadership. So let's hear more about Solomon's wealth and wisdom. The closing section is 20 verses 20 to 34, and I don't have too many names to read. Although I will say this really quickly, what I've learned is that, I mean, I wasn't reading this from the Hebrew. You can see my screen in front that I'm reading from. What I've learned is that if I'm reading it from the English, then I tend to pronounce every vowel. So if there's a double A, I will say kind of thing. I pronounce, and so I realize in the Hebrew the vowels are not present; they're kind of implied. And I know the Masoretic text puts the vowels points in there and whatnot, but in the English translation, I read the vowels and I pronounce the vowels, and that helps me to pronounce. So if my pronunciation sounded a bit different, I read the vowels, and then okay. All right. So Solomon's wealth and wisdom. So 20 to 34. Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tifsa to Gaza, and all the kings west of the Euphrates. And he had peace on all sides around him. And Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And those officers supplied provisions for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table, each one in his month. They let nothing be lacking. Barley and also straw for the horses, and swift steeds they brought to the place where it was required, each according to his duty. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Wow. So Pancho, what do we think about this final section from 1 Kings chapter 4?
Well, there's that Solomon getting, his praises that he was the wisest man around from all the East and Egypt and everywhere in the world. So we see right in the next section then talking about, so like, even like we were saying, the wisdom in having a team, but he still, was top dog there. What I did really like, I'm using the NLT right now, but I think yours are pretty similar. In verse 20 and 29, so it says, the people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And in 29, it says, God gave Solomon very great wisdom and understanding, and knowledge as vast as the sands of the seashore. So they obviously use the same little phrasing there. So I kind of like the picture that paints, that there's a lot of people. It's a big, powerful nation, and too numerous to count. And that kind of makes you think of, God's promise to Abraham. And then Solomon has just as much wisdom to deal with these people and organize things and be a good leader, which is something he needs.
Yeah. I found it interesting in this section that it's like the historian writing this is looking back, and he's and so what we're going to get, I mean, I don't mean this as a spoiler alert, but what we're going to get is after Solomon, the nation's going to split in two, and
I was
there's
going to ask you that. Perfect.
you got Israel, what would be called Israel up north, and then Judah, the main tribe down south. And so you're going to see as the history books of the Old Testament, pan out, you're going to see different paths for Israel and for Judah. And so at some time they're going to be enemies, and they're going to fight each other, and they're going to ally with other nations against each other. And sometimes they're going to be, more friendly. And so you're going to see, as the kings play out, there's going to be a king of Israel and a king of Judah. And so just two different nations. And so, but that's after Solomon's death. So while Solomon's still alive, and we get the idea, it wasn't so much because of Solomon, more about David, but that's getting ahead of myself. But while Solomon's still alive, that there's still one nation. But it's like the historian here is letting us know ahead of time that we've got we've got Israel and we've got Judah. And so even though, if nothing else, and to describe the different parts of the geography there, the different peoples.
Yeah. I would have
But
loved, and I'm going to do it later, and I was thinking about, reading the chapter earlier in the week. I have a study Bible. I wanted to pull it out and look at, I'm sure it has a map of the kingdom when Solomon was there and afterwards. It's just reading these borders. I'm a visual person, so I like reading this, but seeing the borders of the kingdom would be cool. So right now is Israel even bigger than Israel itself? Because they're talking about conquered lands too. So they like he's expanded him or David or after some of the wars, I guess. I guess if you got spoilers from before or after, let me know. But because they've got conquered lands here, even in the Philistines and the borders of Egypt in the
Right.
south. So Israel's pretty big right now. It is a big deal in the area, and like I was gonna ask you about because he got so much into describing how big it is, and we know that there's a divided kingdom later. So he is the last king
Mm.
of one united Israel, huh? Good to know. I was wondering that was
Oh.
my next question for you. So you beat me to the punch, which is excellent because that's a good
What's
point.
really cool about this is that you look back at, well, I'm a dad, and so I've got a son, and one of the things I would love to do is to be able to give my children. I've got a son and a daughter. I'd like to give my children something better than I had, and so David did that for Solomon. So the text here said he had peace on all sides, and so David did not have peace on all sides. David was constantly at war. And the one time where David wasn't at war, David, then, committed adultery at Bathsheba, it seemed like, or he sent his people off to war, but David himself wasn't at war. He stayed home. And so, okay, so Solomon had peace on all sides. That was something that God blessed him with. But see, that the blessing came from David basically won all the battles. And David secured that peace. And so now Solomon gets to have that peace. He gets to live that peace. And so he doesn't have to worry about um, all the wars that his father had to worry about. And so that's just something that stood out. So I don't know right now about Pancho about the geographic barriers, but he wasn't fighting Philistines like David was. He wasn't fighting, all the nations around him
They're
because
already conquered, if anything.
yeah,
David had done all that groundwork. Okay.
it's all taken care of. And so yeah, it's a great thing here. And evidently we have some people here in our text that are very wise. So to be listed in the Bible, he was wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite. Well, I guess Ethan the Ezrahite must have been pretty impressive because the people of the day would have gone, dang, it'd be like, I guess, someone being wealthier than Bill Gates or something, or it's like, oh wow, we would get that in our day. Someone who is fabulously wealthy, and someone saying, yeah, I've got more money than him. Well, he has more wisdom than even Haman, Kalkol, and Darda. Who the heck are they? We don't know. But
Okay.
reading this, that would have come across as a flex. Like, oh my gosh, really? Even them? Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, so we don't get that. We're reading it going, geez, more names. But to this, that was a moment for Solomon to be known as, and speaking proverbs. And I mean, evidently he wasn't just a politician. He wasn't just randomly wise. He could speak about anything. Dude's talking about biology before there's even biology. He's talking about botany before there's even botany. I mean, he was a scientific dude. I mean, he had things going on. He had poetry like nobody's business. All the proverbs are poetry. He knew how to apply life to God's word. I mean, you read some of those proverbs and they're amazing. And so he's speaking proverbs, guys writing songs. I mean, he is, I mean, not only he just like a Renaissance guy. He has, you give him the topic, he could talk about it. And I don't think Solomon would have been lost in any conversation. I think he could have met anybody and just talked about anything they wanted to talk about and probably led the conversation. He just was that kind of a person, and he had that ability. And so God really, really blessed him. Wiser than all other men. Wow. Well, Pancho, I know it's a shorter lesson today. Any final thoughts about First Kings chapter 4? What do you want our listeners and our viewers? What do you want them to take home?
I guess kind of how we were talking about. My big thing is use all there's wisdom using all the resources God places in your life.
Mm.
So even if you are the wisest man, wiser than like we were talking about Haman and Kalkul and Data, he still uses resources well. And from setting up his kingdom and how it's structured to the people in place to still having war horses, even though he had a peaceful kingdom, he was still prepared and ready and just ready to handle anything. And just yeah, like you were saying, at home anywhere. And there's something to trying to be well rounded like that, you know?
Yeah. I guess for me, the final paragraph here, you can see it on the screen, 29 to 34. In verse 29, it says, "And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and the breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore." And then so verse 30, "So that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east, all the wisdom of Egypt." And then verse 34, "And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom." Now, I know when we get to the Gospels much later on, Jesus is going to talk about Solomon and how impressive Solomon was. And he's going to make the point that, one even greater than Solomon is now here. But for me, I'm sensing just a little bit of tension here, Pancho. And the tension is this: verse 29 and 30, God gave this to Solomon. And that's obviously that's a good thing. The gifts that God gives us, how God creates us, how God uses us, how God, uses our story for his glory, uses our talents and our abilities, the callings that God gives us. I mean, yeah, this is a great thing. God has obviously blessed Solomon, and it's from God. So the text is very clear. As amazing as Solomon is, this is from God. But the last verse there of the chapter just gives me a pause for a second, because everyone's coming to see how impressive this guy is. Everyone's going to hear of him. The text even said his name and his wisdom were known in all the other lands. Okay, so that is a God flex. That is okay. God's made his name great and God has done something. But I just wonder, Pancho, I just wonder if there's a tension there. I just wonder if this is like the beginning seeds of maybe Solomon's downfall. Like maybe hear that, oh yeah, my name is great. Everyone's coming to sing songs about me. And so that tension was present with David, because even though he didn't do it, that God gave him victory, Saul was still saying, the people were saying, Saul has killed his thousands, but David is tens of thousands. And so, like, women were singing songs about David. Parades were being thrown for David. And Saul, in his depression, he couldn't handle it. And eventually, he picked up the spear and the javelin and threw it at David. He chased him around the country, even though his own son Jonathan was saying, "Hey, knock it off. What's he done to you?" Nothing. David wouldn't put his hand on Saul when he could have, but Saul still came after him. I wonder if that tension's here, Pancho. God gave all this to him, and even though Solomon doesn't seem to be doing anything wrong right now, I just wonder. Everybody was coming. Everybody was wanting to see this wise man, to hear his wise words, and all the nations of the earth, they just wanted to hear his wisdom. Man.
Yeah, well, for sure. Like one of his proverbs will say, right? Pride comes before the fall, and there doesn't seem to be an easier way to get a big head than to stop thinking about how it was all a blessing from God. And like you said earlier, I got this, and
Right?
that's
I think that's just the attention that even when God blesses us, to be able to, like Solomon is going to have people believe their own press. They want to, what's everyone saying about me? Oh, that's great. We have to give Solomon credit. In this text right here, in this chapter, he's not there yet. He's not doing anything wrong. We can't criticize him. I'm just recognizing attention. And I just wonder if Solomon's going to struggle with pride, because this is kind of like a character study of Solomon. Right here is a good chapter. God is clearly blessing him. He's got all these things going on. Like my buddy Terry would say, "Oh, this guy's got the body that men admire and women adore." Well, he's got the mind that the world is just facing. Like, wow, his wisdom. Okay, there's something going on here, but I just wonder if all this is going to get to Solomon, and if Solomon has a downfall. And I'm just trying not to give too much of a spoiler. If Solomon has a downfall, I wonder if we can start to see some of the foundation stuff in these early chapters, some of the pride. And I loved your connection there. Pride cometh before the fall. Yeah, I wonder. I just wonder if that tension's in that final paragraph. I don't have to be right on that, but I'm just saying, like, man, I would feel tension. Like just reading this, I'm feeling the tension. So anyway, I guess it's, there's that line from the song in the Prince of Egypt movie, "Look at your life through heaven's eyes." And I just wonder, as God blesses us, is this blessing really about me, as if I'm that impressive, or can I make that blessing about God? I guess we're rooting for that with Solomon. We're rooting that he's going to turn this around and make it more about God. Because David, as a man after God's own heart, David would be he always had God's back. David's like, no, no, no. Even fighting Goliath, who the heck are you to go against God? I mean, David's like, God's not going to stand for this. Like, David cared about God, and we're hoping that Solomon does too. Well, Pancho, thanks for joining me today. And in 1 Kings chapter 4, a smaller, shorter lesson today. This has been Big Rev for Masterclass Theology with my friend Pancho. God bless you.